The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Marcus Thornwood's office door like a ghost of decisions past. He'd been expecting it for weeks, ever since he'd made that damned arrangement with the matchmaker in Philadelphia. The paper crinkled between his callous fingers as he read the brief message. Bride arrives Thursday. Train station. 3 o'clock. Marcus set the telegram down on his mahogany desk and stared out the window of his ranch house at the sprawling Montana landscape beyond. 15,000 acres of prime cattle land, more money in the bank than 3 men could spend in a lifetime, and not a soul to share it with except his foreman and the dozen ranch hands who worked his property. At 42, he'd resigned himself to dying alone in this big house, until his sister Margaret had cornered him at Christmas and threatened to disown him if he didn't at least try to find a wife. He'd resisted at first, but Margaret was nothing if not persistent. She'd sent him letters from that matchmaker, Mrs. Adelaide Winters, a woman who specialized in what she delicately called special circumstances. The kind of circumstances that meant the women she represented weren't exactly first choices. Too old, too plain, too poor, too something. Marcus didn't care about any of that. He just wanted someone who could tolerate the isolation of ranch life and maybe give him some companionship in his advancing years. The woman he'd agreed to marry sight unseen was named Eleanor Hartwick. 20 years old, educated, no family to speak of. Mrs. Winters had been oddly vague about why Eleanor needed such an arrangement, but she'd assured Marcus that the woman was of sound character and constitution. He'd wired the money for her passage and the matchmaker's fee without asking too many questions. What did it matter, really? This was a business arrangement, pure and simple. Thursday came faster than Marcus wanted. He spent Wednesday night pacing his bedroom, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. By morning, he'd convinced himself this was all a terrible mistake, but pride kept him from backing out. Marcus Thornwood wasn't a man who went back on his word, even when that word involved marrying a stranger. The train station in Cedar Ridge was barely more than a platform and a small building that served as both ticket office and waiting room. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his best suit brushed clean, his boots polished to a shine that felt ridiculous given that he just spent the morning checking fence lines. The station master, old Harvey Quinn, gave him a knowing look but had the good sense to keep his mouth shut. The train was late, which only stretched Marcus's nerves tighter. He stood on the platform, hat in hand, feeling like a fool. Other folks had gathered too, waiting for supplies or relatives, and he could feel their curious glances. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew why Marcus Thornwood was standing at the train station in his Sunday best on a Thursday afternoon. When the whistle finally sounded in the distance, Marcus's stomach dropped. There was no turning back now. The locomotive pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam, and passengers began to disembark. A merchant with crates of goods, a family with 3 squabbling children, an elderly couple moving slowly down the steps. And then he saw her. Marcus Thornwood had prepared himself for many things. A plain woman, certainly. Someone older than advertised perhaps, or heavier, or with a disagreeable expression. He'd steeled himself against disappointment, reminded himself that this was about practical companionship, not romance. He was not prepared for Eleanor Hartwick. She stood at the top of the train car steps, a small carpet bag in one hand and the other gripping the rail. For a moment she didn't move, just looked out over the platform as if gathering her courage. Marcus found himself unable to breathe. She was beautiful. Not in the delicate, porcelain way of society women in photographs, but in a way that hit him like a physical blow. Dark hair pulled back in a simple style, high cheekbones, and even from this distance, eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds of sadness. But it wasn't her beauty that froze him in place. It was the left side of her face. From her temple down to her jaw, angry red scars twisted across her skin, pulling at the corner of her eye and mouth. The burns were old, healed but permanent, transforming half of her lovely face into a landscape of survival. As she descended the steps and her face turned more fully toward the light, Marcus could see that the scarring continued down her neck and disappeared beneath the high collar of her traveling dress. Understanding crashed over him like a wave. This was why Eleanor Hartwick needed a matchmaker who specialized in special circumstances. This was why she was nobody's first choice. Not because she lacked beauty or grace or bearing, but because half her face bore witness to some terrible accident, some tragedy that had left its mark on her forever. She'd reached the platform now, and her eyes swept the sparse crowd until they landed on him. Marcus saw the exact moment she realized who he was. Her chin lifted slightly, and something hardened in her expression. She'd seen his reaction, had watched him freeze at the sight of her, and had drawn her own conclusions. Marcus's legs finally remembered how to work. He crossed the platform toward her, his mind racing, trying to reorganize every assumption he'd made about this arrangement. She watched him approach with the wary stillness of someone who'd learned to brace for rejection. "Miss Hartwick?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Mr. Thornwood." She didn't curtsy or extend her hand. Just stood there, back straight, meeting his gaze with something that might have been defiance, or might have been despair. "I apologize for the deception. Mrs. Winters was supposed to tell you about my appearance. I insisted she include it in the correspondence, but clearly she took liberties with that instruction." "She mentioned nothing," Marcus confirmed. His mind was still reeling, but he was beginning to understand the full picture now. The matchmaker had deliberately withheld this information, knowing that most men would refuse sight unseen, but banking on the fact that once Eleanor was actually here, Marcus's honor would prevent him from sending her back. "Then you're under no obligation," Eleanor said quietly. Her fingers tightened on her carpet bag. "I have enough money for a room at the boarding house for a few days while I make other arrangements. You can tell people I wasn't suitable, that the arrangement didn't work out. I won't dispute it." She started to turn away, and something in Marcus snapped into place. He reached out and caught her arm, gently but firmly enough to stop her. "Hold on now. I didn't say anything about the arrangement not working out." Eleanor turned back to him, confusion flickering across her features. "But you saw. You looked at me and you froze." "I know what that means, Mr. Thornwood. I've seen that look enough times to last me several lifetimes." "I froze because you're not what I expected," Marcus said honestly. "But not for the reasons you think. Or not only for those reasons." He could see she didn't believe him, could see the walls she'd built around herself, brick by brick, rejection by rejection. How many times had someone looked at her the way he just looked at her? How many times had she seen hope die in someone's eyes when they saw her face? "Mrs. Winters told me you were nobody's first choice," Marcus continued, his words slow and careful. "She said you were 28, educated, had no family. She made it sound like you were a spinster who'd aged out of marriage prospects, maybe a bit too bookish or headstrong for most men's taste. I figured we'd suit each other fine since I'm no prize either. Too old, too set in my ways, living too far from civilization for most women to tolerate." "I'm all of those things," she said, Eleanor replied. "And I am this as well." She turned her face fully toward him, letting him see the full extent of the scarring in the afternoon light. "I was in a fire when I was 19. A boarding house in Philadelphia. 6 people died. I survived, though some days I'm not sure that was the kinder fate." Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath it, old and deep and worn into her bones. "I was engaged before the fire," she continued, "to a clerk in my father's firm. Sweet man, or so I thought. He visited me once in the hospital. Once. Then sent a letter breaking our engagement. Said he couldn't be expected to marry a woman who looked like a monster." Marcus felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and sudden. "Then he was a damn fool and you're better off without him." "Perhaps. But he was the first of many. For 9 years I've lived with my aunt, helping her run her household, knowing I would never have one of my own. When she died last year and left her property to her son, I had nowhere to go. Her son made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay. So I went to Mrs. Winters, willing to take any arrangement she could offer. I was honest with her about my appearance. I thought she'd be honest with you." "She wasn't," Marcus said. But that doesn't change the arrangement if you're still willing. Eleanor searched his face, looking for the lie, the pity, the revulsion. Why? You could send me back. You could find someone else. Someone whole. You are whole, Marcus said firmly. You survived something terrible and you're still standing. That takes a strength most people never have to find. As for finding someone else, I don't want someone else. I want someone who understands that life isn't always pretty, that scars don't make you less than what you were. I've got my own scars, Miss Hartwick. Most of them just don't show on the surface. For the first time since stepping off that train, something in Eleanor's expression softened. You mean that? I do. Marcus picked up her carpet bag. Now we can stand here on this platform and give the gossips more to talk about, or we can go see the Reverend and get this done. The ranch is 2 hours' ride from here. We can make it before dark if we leave soon. Eleanor nodded slowly, and Marcus saw a flicker of something that might have been hope cross her damaged features. They walked together to the church, side by side, and Marcus found himself stealing glances at her. She was extraordinary, he realized. Not in spite of her scars but including them. They were part of her story, part of what had shaped her into this woman who stood so straight and spoke so honestly about her circumstances. The ceremony was brief. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly when he slipped the ring on her finger, but her voice was steady as she spoke her vows. Marcus's own voice was rough with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. This wasn't how he'd imagined this moment, but standing there in that small church with this scarred, proud woman, he felt the first stirring of something that might become more than just companionship. They rode to the ranch in Marcus's wagon, the silence between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Eleanor kept her face turned toward the landscape, watching the endless sky and rolling hills with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. It's beautiful here, she said finally. So open. So much space. Gets lonely, Marcus admitted. Especially in winter. The ranch is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles east. Some women can't take the solitude. Some women have lived in crowded cities where everyone stares and whispers. Eleanor replied. Solitude sounds like a blessing, Mr. Thornwood. Marcus. You're my wife now. Might as well use my given name. Eleanor. She said it like an offering, like the beginning of trust. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where his foreman's wife had promised to have dinner waiting. Marcus helped Eleanor down from the wagon and carried her bag to the porch. She stood there looking at the house, her new home, and Marcus saw her shoulders relax slightly. Whatever she'd been expecting, whatever fear she'd been carrying, seemed to ease just a fraction. It's not fancy, Marcus said. But it's solid and warm and it's yours now, same as mine. Eleanor turned to look at him, and in the dying light, her scars were shadows, and her eyes were bright. Thank you, she said softly. For not sending me back. For not flinching away. For giving me a chance at a life I thought I'd never have. Marcus reached out and took her hand, scarred though she was, damaged though she thought herself. Eleanor, I think maybe we both got something we needed today. Maybe not what we expected, but something better. Let's give this a real try. Not just an arrangement, but a partnership. A life. She squeezed his hand, and he felt the strength in her grip. I'd like that very much. They walked into the house together, the rich rancher and the bride nobody wanted, both of them marked by life in their own ways, both of them hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something neither of them had dared to hope for. Not perfection, but something rarer. Acceptance. Understanding. And the possibility, however fragile, of love.